Welcome back to the morning show here on the Rise News. I am Adesuwa Omoruan.
I'm Rufai Oseni.
And I'm Sheiton Atigari. Good morning.
Outlook for the next level is symbolical proposition of a deliberate intention by the ruling All Progressive Congress APC to take the country to the next level against the backdrop of what was claimed as 16 years of waste under the People's Democratic Party, the PDP.
Well, it will be recalled that the concept of change gave birth to the next level agenda of the current leadership of the federal government of Nigeria.
Also, during the flag-off of President Buhari's campaign, it was observed that education remained his biggest ambition in sight, with commitment to make public investments to spur economic growth, job creation, and broad-based prosperity.
However, efforts have been geared towards the focused next level of job creation across the country, from an enlargement of the Empower program to investing in technology and creative sector jobs to agriculture, revolutionizing access to credit for entrepreneurs and artisans. There is now a scope for over 15 million new jobs.
In addition, through the expanded National Social Investment Program of the federal government, it is believed that Nigerians who are still in poverty have a direct way out.
Joining us now from our Abuja studio is the Senior Special Assistant to President Muhammadu Buhari on Public Affairs, Ajuri Ngelale, who will be engaging on outlook for the next level. What should Nigerians expect across sectors between 2019 and 2023?
Mr. Ajuri Ngelale, thank you so much for joining us on the morning show here on the Rise News. Great to have you.
Thank you so much, Adesuwa. Good morning to you and good morning to the entire crew in Lagos.
Great. Let me just begin by asking you, really, where's the Buhari administration in terms of the next level agenda so far? It's been 104 days. And are there any lessons learned for the next 100 days in sight?
Well, absolutely. Let's start from what has transpired within from, say, the inauguration or post-election period up until this point. We have seen the establishment of new guidelines within the Nigeria Financial Intelligence Unit, which has essentially brought into manifestation long-held concerns about, local government financial autonomy. Are we ever going to get there? Well, those NFIU guidelines have now created the conditions where local governments are now receiving funds directly from the Federation account in a way that has now bypassed the control of state governors. Obviously, it required a lot of political will to do that. That has been done in the post-election period. So I think that's worth acknowledging. Secondly, we saw, if we look at the economy, if you look at the foundation stone of what is, the development of economies around the world, you're talking about the power sector. To encourage investment and reduce production costs. Within the first 100 days, we saw a landmark signing that we believe Nigerians will look back on as a very historic moment in our nation's history between the federal government and Siemens, the global engineering giant from Germany. The details of that are as follows. Between 2015 and 2018, we understand that power generation increased from 5,000 megawatts to 7,000 megawatts. Power transmission increased from 5,000 megawatts to almost 8,000 megawatts, but power distribution was at 3,500 megawatts and remains at 3,500 megawatts. In fact, sometimes fluctuating even down to, say, 3,200 to 3,000 megawatts. We have not seen improvement in the power distribution value system of the entire sector's value chain. Ukraine. And that's something that this Siemens deal is going to address. Essentially, what Mr. President has said in his wisdom is instead of throwing billions of dollars at new power plants, and we're not able to get that power into the homes of Nigerians, let's focus our resources on the distribution component of the value chain. And in doing so, over the last 6 months or so, German engineers, in conjunction with Nigerian engineers, have gone around all of the distribution infrastructure all across the country. They have done forensic audits on each of the relevant stations. They've essentially said this needs to be refurbished or this needs to be constructed. They built the roadmap on the basis of that forensic audit. And what is happening now is that within the roadmap that has been signed through the Bureau of Public Enterprises, within the next 2 years, we're saying it openly so Nigerians can hold us to account. Within the next 2 years, by 2021, power distribution is expected to rise from 3,500 megawatts to 7,000 megawatts, meaning that what is generated and transmitted will finally make its way into the homes and businesses of Nigerians. And obviously, we expect that as a consequence of that, we're going to have certainly more stable power supply. The same projections toward 2023, which is obviously 4 years from now, is that there will be up to 11,000 megawatts in both in transmission, generation, and distribution. In accordance with this landmark plan with Siemens. These are just a few of the things that have happened within the first 100 days.
All right, Ajuri, it's a joy you made mention of all those areas. And I'll take you on power, because this administration brought out a document that was in the last dispensation talking about the plan for the future, the ERGP. And a lot of the milestones in that have not been reached yet. You see, I have up to 10.5 million children out of school in Nigeria. In fact, UNICEF recently said 1 in 5 Nigerian child out of school in the world is a Nigerian child. And I'll take you on power. If you are saying Siemens will come and upset the apple cart, a lot of Nigerians have said we've heard this before. We are going to increase generation. In fact, there's a newspaper headline that was trending at some point as a 1983 that said by December 1983, not having power will be a thing of the past. But it's been many years down the line. What happened to Azure power plants? What happened to other power projects across the country? What happened to the discos? What is it these people can't do that Siemens is coming to do now? Is this Siemens deal not another P&ID deal? Because that was how they said during the P&ID deal, that we're going to convert wet gas to lean gas and provide power for this country. What happened to those deals? Azure power plant at first. Why is Siemens coming in? Only to, when you think of the fact that we know the antecedents of Siemens as regards the telecom sector in this country.
Thank you so much, Rufai. There's so much that you said, and I'm going to really take my time to dissect the concerns that you've addressed. First of all, take into account that when you're talking about Siemens in the past in relation to the Nigerian government or the Nigerian public sector, you referred to the very ludicrous and controversial deal where you had a corruption scandal essentially take place. First of all, acknowledge that there's a difference in leadership. If leadership is corrupt, and I'm not going to single out anybody on this platform, but clearly if leadership is corrupt, and the mind state of a leader is essentially to say, look, I'm only going to be in public office for a finite amount of time. I need to make as much money as I possibly can. Let me use this opportunity to steal money. You're always going to find international companies that are going to be ready to sit down with you at the table and figure out how you can essentially enrich yourself. Okay, so that's a reality of global economics right now with corrupt governments. Now, this is why in his wisdom, President Muhammadu Buhari has said, look, this is not going to be a traditional deal. We're not going to run this through the Ministry of Power like we have done with previous administrations, where essentially the minister and the PERMSEC and the directors sit around the table with the heads of Siemens or whatever company is involved, and they decide which contracts will be given to which subcontractors. So a minister can call his brother and say, well, my brother has an electricity firm, or my sister has an engineering firm. She's going to handle this subcontract underneath the larger deal, and we'll be able to find some money inside. And ultimately, the money gets misapplied and nothing happens. So that's what has happened in the past. What Mr. President has done is he has said this is going to be a government-to-government transaction. The same way that President Muhammadu Buhari purchased the 12 Super Tucano fighter jets from the United States of America through the deal with the United States government is the same way that the Siemens deal is being constructed. So there will be no subcontractors. There will be no, the minister calling whoever he feels like calling to execute contracts. Siemens as a brand is going to do all of the procurement, all of the engineering, all of the installations, and all of the construction as part of this deal. So we pay through the Nigerian government to the German administration, and President Muhammadu Buhari is directly supervising this contract. That's on the one hand, but you addressed some other issues, which is very important. You talked about previous projections that were made and failed. Let's get to that. We understand. Look, I was actually a reporter, ironically, in the power sector. I know that the federal government for many years was saying we're going to be a top 20 economy by 2020. We're going to have 40,000 megawatts of electricity by 2020. Nigerians have heard all these projections, and so I don't fault any Nigerian who is skeptical or suspicious. I don't. I think that skepticism is well earned because of all of the failures on the part of previous governments in this country. I think what's important is to say, look, if you're saying that you're going to do something, it's fair for Nigerians to ask, what is it that you have done to give me a sense that you're going to do what you're now promising to do? And that's why I started by pointing out the fact that from 2015 to 2018, with limited resources, power generation did increase from 5,000 megawatts to 7,000 megawatts. Power transmission capacity did increase from 5,000 megawatts to nearly 8,000 megawatts. Distribution has not shown the development that has gone into that sector over the last 3 years, and that's why this deal is going to address that. So do Nigerians have the right to be skeptical? Absolutely. But everything that is happening right now is a complete departure from what has happened in the past.
Thank you so much, Ajuri. What we are seeing here is when the President Muhammadu Buhari came on, one of the things he promised for the next level was that he was going to fix the economy. However, 100 days after, we're looking at the second quarter, the GDP rate is down by 1.94%. And now with the P&ID saga, we are at risk of 3% of our GDP being at risk. How are you planning on how does the administration plan on making the Nigerian economy conducive for foreign investors to make it better for the Nigerian citizens?
Thank you very much for that important question. First of all, it's well appreciated that the GDP has slowed down over the last quarter. I don't want to get into the last 4 years and how we came into recession. I want to be forward-looking here. The fact of the matter is, when you talk about GDP slowdown, you look at all of the indices from around the world. You know, a lot of times when we do our analysis within Nigeria, whether it's in our newspapers or on our television sets or on our radio sets, one of the things we miss is we tend to analyze Nigerian economic dynamics through the prism of a silo. So it's like this, it's kind of like this foundational assumption that what happens here affects like this country, and essentially everything that is within this country, when we talk about economic indices, are as a result of governance decisions taken from within the country. Yes, governance decisions taken from within the country have a huge role to play. But if you look at what's happening around the world, you look at Chinese GDP, look at American GDP, look at GDP across Europe, across the countries in Europe, look at GDP across Latin America. What you're going to see is you're going to see a slowdown. These are the top economies in the world that we're watching.
Okay, Ajuri, can you hear me? Ajuri, you'll get to that point real quickly. We'll go for a quick break. You come back and you land on that point, all right? Thank you so much. Keep it locked right here, still the Rise News channel.
We still have with us in our Abuja studios Ajuri Ngelale, who's Special Assistant to President Muhammadu Buhari on Public Affairs. Thank you so much for staying with us, Ajuri. And you were making the point about the GDP. My colleague Shaitan had asked you, but when you look at the economic numbers and how the president stacks up in the last 100 days, it's not just the GDP. We are looking at the external reserves. It's on a 5-month low. We are looking at capital importation. It's also on a steady decline. Is this not a setback for one of his major campaign promises on revamping the Nigerian economy?
Okay, first of all, thank you, Adesuwa. Let me finish my response to the first question, and then I'm going to address the larger issues you have now added to the question. I was talking about GDP slow growth around the world. Obviously, when the U.S. and China, the two largest economies in the world, have gone into a trade war to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars, the reverberating effects around the globalized economy are tremendous. And I want to be very practical about this so that we understand that I'm not just speaking grammar here, that these are real issues. When the United States of America and places these kinds of tariffs on the Chinese economy. Chinese investment, which we know has been the top investor around the African continent, and Nigeria being around the top of that list in terms of investment destination of Chinese funds. Obviously, the funds that would now go into a Chinese investment in the African continent are now being funneled in to try and support the yuan, because we know that their currency is currently under very severe attack right now, and they're trying to support the value of their currency by throwing in billions of dollars on a daily basis to support that currency. These things have reverberating effect. We're seeing it around the world. So Nigeria is no exception to that, because obviously within China, India, some of these countries where they are importing our oil, for example, these are the countries that are now being hit by reduced revenues as a result of reduced demand, as a result of the trade war that's taking place. These are real issues, and we're being impacted. The second issue, you talked about capital importation. You're talking about the same problem. The capital importation has to do with the money that comes into the country from foreign destinations, investment dollars, whether it's portfolio or whether it's actual. And that's obviously going to be impacted if there's a crunch in the global economy, and that's what we're seeing. But to your point, I want to just make something very, very clear. Just because on a quarter-to-quarter basis, capital importation has gone down over the last 2 quarters, doesn't mean that we're not still on an unprecedented growth trajectory. I'm going to give you a very practical example, and I hope that everybody watching this program will open their smartphone and fact check what I'm saying. Over the course of the first 2 quarters of this year, capital importation is approximately, give or take, $13 billion. You look at capital importation on a year-by-year scale, year-by-year basis, from 2007 to date, the largest you will see is about $21 billion, and that was in 2013 when oil price was at $120 per barrel. We know oil price is less than half of that right now, or around half of that right now, but yet we're seeing more in terms of capital importation on the year as a whole. And I think that is a very clear indicator. The same statistics you're referring to from the NBS will also show you that we've had monumental growth in the non-oil contribution to the nation's GDP. In fact, if you look at manufacturing, for example, you would see that in 2016, we were at negative 4.2% contribution to GDP, and in 2018, we were at 2.1%, which is obviously a growth curve of about 6.3%. 6.3% is tremendous for manufacturing to GDP in any country, not to speak of a developing country that has certain economic limitations. So, yes, there are issues, but there is no doubt with empirical data that you can make the case that Nigeria is not making significant progress. We have the kind of global economic slowdown we've seen.
Okay, but you still haven't answered the question that I asked about the P&ID case. It's the largest that we've seen in Nigeria so far, and it's definitely going to affect our reserves. You still haven't told us how the administration plans to settle this outside of Nigeria. You haven't told us that.
Yes, Adesuwa, first of all, let me make it clear that I'm not running from answering that question. I was trying to get to the fundamentals of the question that you were asking me. The P&ID saga is something that Nigerians are now very, very familiar with. All of the details have been splashed on all of the newspaper pages. without getting into a blame game and trying to say this is why we're in this situation, let's look at the realities today. Obviously, we know that there's a judgment of over $9 billion, potentially, that could potentially be enforced against the federal government of Nigeria if litigation over time doesn't prove otherwise. But looking at the fundamentals of the case, I think there is an emerging consensus that there is a very strong possibility, due to the kinds of loopholes that we've seen in the implementation and even the formulation of that particular contract, that show that we can actually win in appeal litigation on that case. We've already seen, just to give a very clear example of what I'm talking about, we have already seen the son of the owner of PNID, Mr. Quinn's son, approach the Nigerian government to say, look, how can we work out a settlement? Because they realize that there is every potential that in the appeal litigation they could end up with absolutely nothing. So now they're hoping that they can get something out of the deal. That's very important to mention, because if they knew that they had a 100% chance of getting the money that's being splashed on all the newspapers, they probably wouldn't be looking for the federal government to make a solution, to make a settlement that would earn them some money. Now, the second leg of that, I want to be very clear about this so that everybody can understand. We just had a judgment, a very similar judgment. A court issued a judgment of about $2 billion on a very similar contractual issue within the same oil and gas sector against Nigeria. The Nigerian government goes to a U.S. court to advance litigation, and guess what? We just saw the judgment a few days ago come out and say that Nigeria is no longer on the hook to pay about $2 billion over that issue. The point being, and ironically, you'll see the PNID scandal in the media, but you're not going to see most of our media organizations, unfortunately, address the fact that we just got off the hook for $2 billion in a very similar case. So I think that we should wait. We should allow litigation to play out. And then once litigation plays out, we can then figure out what it is that's on the line. But in terms of our foreign reserves, which you touched on, we're currently sitting at about $44 billion. Even if that $9 billion were to come off the books, you're looking at about 34 to 35 billion dollars in foreign reserves that would still be there. The safe zone is $30 billion.
Okay, Ajuri, quick question for you. I want to take you back on the economy you talked about. A lot of people will look at what you said and the point you try to make for the economy and say it doesn't hold water, because despite all the global threats and global headwinds, a country like Senegal is still growing 6.2%. Many countries, and I can go on a tirade of all these countries. Ethiopia growing close to 7%. All of these countries still are facing these headwinds. Why is it Nigeria growing? A lot of people will tell you that the economy is not viable as it is today. An international newspaper outlet released reports say the quickest way to lose money is to bring it to Nigeria. So investors don't want to come. Currently, with this xenophobic back and forth, some major investment might be threatened in this country. And also, your administration came to this government with a big campaign against corruption. But some people say, some quarters, that your administration has been a mechanism to aid corruption. And I'll give you instances. A certain person called Danjuma Goje ran to be Senate president at some point. He was being tried by the EFCC. But all of a sudden, the case flipped around because he made a concession not to run as Senate president again. And we had a newly prosecutor on the case, and Danjuma Goje's case is forgotten today. Even the shocking one is the prosecutor against Akpabio, Godswill Akpabio, former governor of Akwa Ibom State, with his case going on. Funny enough, Akpabio now has been handed in a position where his Minister of Nigeria Delta Affairs and his Minister of State was his prosecutor in his corruption case. So a lot of people are saying anti-corruption fight, APC, this is a laughing stock. What do you say to all this?
Wow. Well, Rufai, it's interesting that you say, what do you say to all this? Because you really threw the kitchen sink there. Because at first I thought you were going into the economy, then you went into corruption and you joined it into one question. I'm going to try the best I can to divide the issues and address each one. Please. First of all, you addressed the Senegalese economy, for example. You touched on how they're growing at 6%. And then you said a lot of you made a lot of speculative statements that I realized didn't really have much ground in fact. For example, you're saying investors come to Nigeria to lose money. You made a statement about so many assumptions that you're not really tying to any fact.
Ajuri, Bloomberg said that. I didn't say that. Bloomberg released, Forbes. In fact, Forbes released a statement to say, and I'm sure you've read that article, that the best place to lose money in the world is Nigeria. Forbes said that, Ajuri. I didn't say that.
I'm on the basis of what statistical data? Because I've already pointed out
on the basis of FDI. Ajuri, do you want to compare foreign direct investment with subsequent year-on-year administrations? Ajuri, do you want to compare? Do you know the foreign direct investment outlook in Nigeria as we speak today? You want to compare that? You want to compare capital flows?
Okay. Okay, Rufai. Okay, first of all, this is a televised program. I'm not here to get into a heated argument with anybody. I want to address the issues as they are in a very dispassionate and unemotional manner. First of all, the way that you raised the issues of investment. Let's just take each one as it came. All right. You started off by saying that Nigeria is not growing, right? Obviously, Nigeria is growing at just under 2%, which means it is growing. The issue is it's not growing as fast as we want it to grow, but it is growing. First of all, you look at the scale of economies. If you're comparing it to Senegal, what is the scope of the Senegalese GDP? What is the scope of Nigeria's GDP? All right. So when you talk about growth, it's relative to the scale, to the size of the GDP and the gross and the sum of all goods and services in that country within the calendar year. So if you look at Nigeria currently, as we speak right now, the growth is predicated mostly on non-oil sector growth because the oil price is low. If the oil price was this low in, say, for example, 2013, if it was this low in 2013, you would not see us growing even at 2%, even though you saw it at 6% and 7% because of the oil price at the time. That is extremely important to mention. Second of all, you raised the issue of I think corruption. You threw like 5 questions at once here, so I hope I'm not forgetting anything. The issues of corruption, you mentioned Danjuma Goje, you mentioned Senator Godswill Akpabio, you mentioned the idea that
Ajuri, we'll quickly go back, we'll go to a break, we'll come back and you'll answer the question on Godswill Akpabio, Danjuma Goje, and there's some other questions. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to the morning show here on the Rise News. Still speaking about the next level administration, and we have the Senior Special Assistant to President Muhammadu Buhari on Public Affairs, Ajuri Ngelale, with us from our Abuja studios. Thank you once more for staying with us. Yeah. Before that break, you were responding to Rufai's question on how any inroads made in the fight against corruption is tainted by appointments made by this same administration.
And the case of Danjuma Goje, like you were trying to mention.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you so much, team. Thank you very much. First of all, I just want to touch on something very quickly. When we talk about diversifying the nation's economy, let's be very, very clear. The GDP of Nigeria last year was $400 billion. 397, basically $400 billion GDP. The GDP of the country that my friend Rufai mentioned, Senegal, was $16 billion. Total GDP of that nation. That is an agricultural economy that basically runs on fish and groundnut export, etc. They're not diversifying away from oil and gas. And so the growth rate, like I said, is relative to your GDP, number one. But number two, when you're diversifying away from a staple of your economy, that is oil and gas. I need there to be relational context.
Hello, Ajuri, I quickly disagree with that. And when you look at the indices, a GDP based on the growth of a nation. Ajuri, you were so quick to talk about China and India. When you look at China and India, as at the time China joined the World Trade Organization in year 2001, what was the GDP of China? But it was because they were growing consistently 15, 12, 11, 10%, that it burgeoned into something now that in terms of purchasing power parity, they are almost bigger than America. So people have a time to grow. I mean, Ajuri, let's not have this fisticuff about the economy, but I totally disagree with that. The fact that Senegal is growing 6.2% and their GDP is 16 billion.
Rufai, the conversation, I think both of us would be done a justice. If you allow me, because when you ask a question, I don't interrupt you. Okay. So if I give you a response, I would really appreciate it if you didn't interrupt me. I think that's the right way to go.
Okay.
The issue about China and India, for example, is, let me just use China because that's a good case in point. You're talking about a country that is run by one party. That has the same ideology, the same ethos, whether it's this leader or the next leader, that's consistent. What we have in developed countries like Nigeria is you can have somebody emerge as president who controls FIRS, NMPC, CBN, all of the fundamentals of the economy, appointing regulators, and if that person is corrupt, if that person's sole aim or desire is to enrich himself by looting Nigeria, then obviously Nigeria cannot obtain a consistent growth trajectory because we have political leaders who, on one day you have somebody who has integrity, and then 4 years later you can have somebody who's absolutely corrupt. So you're not going to have that consistent growth that the Chinese enjoy under a one-party system. Everything is relational if we're having that kind of a conversation. But to the larger issues that you raised, which are about the issues of corruption. Let's go into issues of corruption. This administration of President Muhammadu Buhari put in the whistleblower scheme, just one example. We have realized over $450 million from that small whistleblower program. If you want to look at civil service reform, the presidential initiative on continuous audit put in place by President Muhammadu Buhari has saved the nation 200 billion naira every year because it exposed 54,000 fake ghost worker entries in the civil service system. That's just the civil service. Now let's talk about the actual financial hub of the country within the central bank. We know that there was an actual implementation of the Treasury single account policy that was put in place around September 2015, just a few months after President Buhari got into office. And what have we seen since then? $8 billion was 8 trillion naira was moved from deposit money banks into the TSA under the CBN. We are now approaching 200 billion naira total that has been saved on banking charges since then. That's just banking charges. What used to happen, I want to get very practical so our people can understand me this morning. There was a time when NNPC had 17,000 bank accounts. Within NNPC alone, 17,000 bank accounts, which means that somebody, an official in NNPC can say, you know what, I'm going to have a conversation with the CEO of this bank, all right? And in that conversation, I'm going to tell him that we're going to put 5 billion naira of NNPC money in a fixed deposit, right? So they put that in a 1-year fixed deposit. The comeback on that is, let's just say, a billion or 750 million. The CEO now, or the executive of the bank sends the 750 million to the wife of the official in the NNPC, and everybody's happy. That's what's been going on. And that's why you saw the kinds of volatility within the banking system when President Muhammadu Buhari exercised his political will and made the TSA a reality. Now we have about 11 trillion naira that's sitting in one account that everybody can see at the same time. These are some of the systemic reforms that can be put into place. The last thing I'll mention, which is very important, is the issue of revenue generation. We know that between 2010 and 2015, there was a committee that essentially investigated revenue generation chaired by Vice President Professor Yemi Osinbajo that found that between 2010 and 2015, between FIRS, between Customs, NIMASA, JAM, some of these agencies, $21 billion in 5 years alone did not make it into the Federation account. We have seen from 2015 up until this point, continuously and consistently, the Customs is generating 1 trillion naira every year for the Federation account. 1 trillion that was not going into the Federation account before. Just for example, NPA is doing over 100 billion. NIMASA is doing about 20 billion. These funds were being chopped from inside these agencies over the previous administrations. This is how this administration has been fighting corruption. Now, you asked me about Danjuma Goje. I want to touch that because you made some strong allegations about Danjuma Goje and Senator Akpabio. Let me just touch that very quickly. First of all, Senator Goje's, the Senate presidency tussle in the Senate was in June 2019, as we recall, first or second week of June. What happened in Danjuma Goje's case was that in March, which was several months before the real heat of the Senate presidential race, 19 charges were dropped in a high court somewhere, I think it was in Jos, if I'm not mistaken, you can Google it, that had nothing to do with any meeting in the villa, that had nothing to do with any kind of a handshake deal, as it were. And then what now happens is Senator Goje meets President Buhari with Governor Nasir El-Rufai and some others in the villa. And then some time later, we see that the Ministry of Justice takes over that case from the EFCC, the prosecution, on the remaining 2 charges out of 21, of which 19 had already been struck out. Now, he takes the 2 charges, and now, like you mentioned, there's the nolle prosequi, right? Now, in all of that is to say that if there was some handshake deal, where is the evidence of that? Because the 19 charges that were struck out several months before the Senate presidency race heated up, that's not accounted for in your explanation. On the other side of that, I would ask you, if you look at Joshua Derrier, for example, this is an APC senator who is sitting in the Senate, who is about to run for re-election, who would probably win because of the clout that he has in a state that he used to govern. He is in jail right now. He's in jail as an APC senator who did not get to contest re-election because President Muhammadu Buhari's administration oversaw an investigation, a prosecution, and a conviction that has him in jail. Jolly Nyame, a former governor of Taraba, an APC member, not a PDP member, an APC member, is in jail right now under this administration. So the idea that things are being done to save people, I don't know that it holds water. In the case of Senator Akpabio, I would take you to the circumstances of that case. We have not seen anything in terms of any kind of a judicial process to show that this is a very serious corruption case. What we had were some media reports that said he stole some money. There was not any accounts given. There was not anybody who is testifying against him to say this is what happened, this is not what happened. And this is from when he was a governor of Akwa Ibom State under the PDP. So surely if he is an APC official now, certainly some PDP officials that were in his government in Akwa Ibom years ago would have every incentive to come against him now.
Let's move on now. The president's tendency towards inaction earned him the title Baba Go Slow. And just recently, the APC has said, has told Nigerians that is now a thing of the past. It should be referred to as Baba Fast. And the only cogent reason attached to that is the fact that he set up a cabinet faster than he did in 2015. I want to know, is this also celebrated in the presidency, that the president put up a cabinet 55 days after inauguration? Is this why the president should be referred to as Baba Fast now? Is that also being celebrated? In 3 months, actually.
My sister, thank you very much for that question. I don't believe that is what the national chairman is trying to celebrate by just on its own as an achievement. Certainly, I'm not coming here on air to suggest to you that the composition of a cabinet is an achievement. That is not an achievement. The composition of a cabinet is simply to ensure that achievements that have already been gained over the last 4 years are built upon and escalated into greater achievements over the next 4 years. I will say this. I want to take our viewers through this. This is extremely important to note. Over the past, from 1999, all right, we have had a process of transition in which obviously it's constitutional that the Senate has to be inaugurated, that the principal officers of the chambers have to be elected. Now, after that process of election, which comes after Inauguration Day, by the way, they now have to go through a screening process and all of that. We know what the processes are. What has happened in the past is that a minister is appointed, right? You have a screening exercise that goes on. Then once they get into office, on their first day in office, I can tell you this firsthand because I am actually a son of a former minister. So I have some level of insight into how this has worked in the past. You would get into office, your permanent secretary and several directors will rush into your office and they will say, Honorable Minister, sir, these are the balance sheets. This is what we have in this account. This is what we have in this account. These are the projects that are ongoing. This is the status of this project. This is the status of this project. Your Honorable Minister, what do you think we should go into? What do you think we should prioritize? Right? And it's basically all on the head of the Honorable Minister to decide all these factors and determine what he's going to do in terms of the projects, et cetera, et cetera. Now, for the first time in our history, since the beginning of the Fourth Republic in 1999, what Mr. President did was he inaugurated a committee, the Projects, Programs, and Policies Audit Committee, chaired by Vice President Yemi Osinbajo. What they did was they looked at all the projects across all MDAs under every ministry, every unique project, a specific project, and said, what percentage of completion on each of these projects? Okay, let's note that down. Based on the level of the status of completion of those projects, 30%, 70%, or 5%, or whatever the completion percentage it is, we know that we have to allocate this much money on each project in order to get it completed by 2023. So that means that in the 2019 budget, we need 20 billion. In 2020 budget, we need 15, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, until these projects are completed. That audit was conducted. On the basis of that audit, what the federal government did through the Office of the Secretary to the Government of the Federation, OSGF, was they now created a voluminous document, sector by sector, showing the status updates and showing the priority projects of the federal government of Nigeria under President Muhammadu Buhari's administration, so that in conjunction with the document, the ministers it's not up to them to just decide what's prioritized and what's not, or what money should be spent on what, or whether they should bring somebody as a contractor or whether they should bring somebody else as a contractor. It's already on the document. So literally all they are now are implementing agents for the first time, as opposed to a scenario in the past when they were literally the entire institution to themselves. I think Nigerians need to understand that all of the minutiae of these processes to appreciate that something different has transpired. And so when Comrade Adams Oshomole is saying that it's Baba Go Fast, he's talking about the nuances of process that are absolutely new to our federal government system. And the last point I want to make very quickly is that in the past, what we have had was we've had ministers get in trouble over certificate scandals, right? We had a minister resign over a certificate scandal. We had another one embroiled in another certificate scandal. So what Mr. President said is we are not going to play with the screening process. And I'm not just talking about the Senate. I'm talking about the security services. He ensured that all diligence was paid to the security screening process so that we avoid a scenario where there's a story splashed on Premium Times basically talking about a minister who falsified a certificate. So when the president does his due diligence, we call him slow. But when he doesn't, we malign him, etc. So there's really no winning in the eyes of some commentators.
Ajuri, it's a great thing, when we have scrutiny to be able to look at things happening, and it's like you said, it's an indication for the president, going fast. Absolutely. In your words. But the truth is, Ajuri, all this are good rhetorics, but there's no money on ground. The country's empty. Recently, the FIRS boss was summoned because they said he didn't meet task projections. The country is empty. No money coming in. We don't have money to execute all those projects. And secondly, we have been fighting a war for quite a time. And Ajuri, I want you to make a statement here on this. The government keeps saying we've decimated Boko Haram, but we have bombings everywhere. Ajuri, has Boko Haram been decimated? And how do you fund on this project where there is no money? It's empty.
Thank you very much, my brother. First of all, what you've just said, I consider it a very patriotic concern and appeal. Let's get to the first point, which is obviously about project funding, because it's a very important point that you've made and it's legitimate. From 2016 to 2017, we had obviously a dearth of resources, but we still, within those two budgets, I'm saying this to go somewhere, within those two budgets, we were able to do 2.7 trillion naira in infrastructure spending. I'm not talking about what's on a budget document. I'm talking about cash actually released to the ministries involved.
Right. Ajuri, we both know that that's disputable. Ajuri, that sum of 2.7 is disputable.
That is a fact.
It is disputable. It is disputable.
No, Rufai, okay. That is not disputable. That is a fact. Go to the Ministry of Finance. That is a fact.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
That is a fact. It's not disputable at all. The thing about it, and thank you for allowing me to finish my response before interfering. I appreciate it. The issues of how we get funding moving forward is we're going to have to be very creative. The president, understanding that these are very serious issues, has established a presidential infrastructure development fund called PIDF, being run through the Nigerian Sovereign Wealth Investment Authority and also the Sovereign Investment Authority, and also in conjunction with some multilateral agencies. He's identified a few key projects in all parts of the country that are of priority attention, and they are as follows. The second Niger Bridge, for example, taking place right now, is set for completion in February 2022. That is a 200 billion naira project, about $500 million. We couldn't fund that in the budget. So he established the PIDF to create a mechanism whereby the federal government of Nigeria can pay directly to the contractor, removing bureaucracy, removing corrupt actors within the civil service from the process, ensuring they get their money directly. The same thing he's doing in the Siemens deal. The same thing under the PIDF is Second Niger Bridge in the east, Lagos-Ibadan Expressway in the west, the East-West Road in the south, the Abuja-Kaduna to Kano Expressway in the north, and also the Mambila hydropower project in Taraba, which is 3,500 megawatts. That requires counterpart funding from China in that particular example. So the president has been very adamant, first of all, about ensuring that we develop mechanisms that can fund infrastructure outside of the budget. The second point, which is very important because a lot of Nigerians don't know about this, is Executive Order number 7. Executive Order number 7 is the Road Infrastructure Refurbishment and Construction Tax Credit Scheme. And what that does is essentially it says, instead of taking federal funds that are scarce at the moment, we are going to bring in private sector actors who can bring in their own capital to build federal roads and federal infrastructure. And in response to that, we are going to give them a kind of a credit on their taxes that is commensurate with the expenditures on the projects. I want to just say, something very quickly.
Okay, say that and go to say that and go to the security question because time is not our friend. Yes. Very, very important. Thank you. The tax credit scheme doesn't just take a bulk amount of money and essentially award it to the contractor. Because we still need to raise revenue from these companies, the federal government, in its wisdom under the president, said we're going to calibrate the tax credit repayment so that it's over the course of, say, 10, 20 years, so that those taxes, tax revenues from those companies continue to come in. You mentioned that there was an issue within the FIRS. I want to be very clear to Nigerians this morning that there was not an issue of corruption within the FIRS as it relates to this query. What it was a projected tax revenue that the FIRS said it would get to that it did not get to. Ajuri, real quickly. As Boko Haram be decimated, just one word answer for that, like the government would normally say.
Very good. Yeah, and the issue of Boko Haram being decimated. Does Boko Haram exist? Yes. The federal government never said Boko Haram doesn't exist. It has been decimated to the extent that it does not control territory in this country. It is not bombing Abuja in different parts of the country with levity as it was before. We're not seeing bombings, big mosque bombings and church bombings anymore.
Honest question. I get what you're trying to say, but time is not on our side here. Let me just ask you this honest question. What would you grade President Muhammadu Buhari so far?
How would I rate Muhammadu Buhari so far, the president?
Yes. How would
across
you grade
what, economy or across the government?
Across his promises and deliverables. How would you grade him so far?
Yes, thank you. I want to believe that all questions and all responses this morning have been honest, because I want Nigerians to verify what we're saying to them. But in terms of my grading, I would say that the president has done his absolute best with the resources available, and I believe that there's going to be much more progress across all sectors of the nation's economy and security fronts in the years ahead. In fact, to your point about security, if you look at the month-on-month casualties in this country as a result of bandits, Boko Haram, all put together, you're going to see from January to now a steady decline across the months. I think that speaks to the adjustments that our security forces have made under the watch of the commander-in-chief.
So Ajuri, you will score him a 10, a 9 over 10, or a 10 over 10, or a 7 over 10?
I didn't know that I was hired to be a
No,
judge.
I'm just asking you. I'm just asking you.
That's the job of.
Would you score him a 9 over 10 or a 7 over 10 by your estimation?
I would say that is the job of the media and of our people to assess the president.
Okay, so you're not giving a score to him. Okay, good. All right.
Okay, so before you go, I just wanted to talk about the minimum wage and repeal enactment act that was signed just in April before he came back into power. It was something that made Nigerians very happy. They thought made Nigerians very happy, and we thought that this was going to be a way forward. However, we're still getting reports that only people from grade 1 to 4 have actually been met and have had their minimum wage increase. Why do we have such a delay between policy and impact in the Buhari administration?
Well, first of all, I want to just make it very clear that this is not something that's unique to the Buhari administration. Any government in the world, if you make a policy, it takes time to phase it into implementation, especially when you're talking about the scale of what we're talking about. And taking into account, this isn't just a federal project. This has to do with what states are paying to their workers. So you have to understand that there's collaboration between the state governments and the presidential administration to make this happen. Now, the president has shown the political will to get it done with labor and all the actors involved. Even when the governors were telling him, sir, we're not going to pay this money. But eventually they agreed to pay. But now the issue is about ensuring that they pay at a time when you've taken money from the states and you've ensured that it gets to the local governments. There are less funds. So I think implementation takes time. The fact of the matter is, government is a large operation, and we have to ensure that the state governments are held accountable to hold up their end of the bargain as it relates to the minimum wage issue, and not just the president.
Well, thank you so much, Ajuri Ngelale, for honoring our invitation, and wish you the best of luck in this administration. And that brings us to the end of the show today. Many thanks for watching. I am Adesuwa Omoruan.
I'm Rufai Oseni.
And I'm Sheito Atigari. Thank you for watching from our entire team here in Lagos. Enjoy the rest of your morning and, of course, the rest of your day. Goodbye.